Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the QueerCME podcast. I'm super excited to welcome our guest, Bowie or Rainbow today. And I will let you introduce yourself and we'll go from there.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I am Rainbow / Bowie. I like both names, so neither one is wrong. Last name Winnike. My pronouns are they, them. And I am a NeuroQueer gender doula. So what that means is I support people who are neurodivergent and trans or queer who are going through their journey of trying to figure out their identity, their gender identity, with the steps of navigating that.
Yeah, which I'm very excited to learn more about your work. We do try to focus on lifting up voices of folks with lived experience. Are there any identities you feel comfortable sharing with our audience? If not, no worries. We can always edit this part out.
Yeah, you mean for me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I identify as trans, non-binary, ADHD / neurodivergent, and also animistic and witchy.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing. And then, yeah, can you maybe, I feel like you gave a brief summary of kind of what your work is working in like the NeuroQueer gender doula space, but can you share a little more with our listeners, like what shape that work takes, or maybe, yeah, let's start there. I feel like that's a good start.
Yeah. Yeah, so I feel like when people are going through a gender transition, there's just so many different aspects to it. There's the social aspects of coming out. There's the executive functioning of figuring out like when to schedule who, when, what order to do things in. And there's all the emotions that come along with that. So a lot of what my role is through navigating that aspect of it. So I'm not going to be giving medical advice, but I may help someone find a doctor that can support them, or navigating insurance, or if people are really nervous about going to the doctor, it's like we can do a practice run, talk through what they're going to say. So it can look a lot of different ways, but I kind of see myself as filling in kind of some of the gaps for folks who are going through this process.
Rad. And like when people work with you, like I'm sure, because like what you do is pretty individualized to who you're working with, but is there like a general like time frame or a number of sessions or like kind of like shape specifically to the objective parts of the work?
Yeah. It is pretty unique to each person who comes to me and what they're coming in for. So some folks will be coming in for support, like with top surgery, for example, and we'll do the prep, and then I'll maybe meet with them afterwards and a little bit of follow-up. And other folks want more ongoing support.
Yeah. And so you kind of do both like episodic support and continual support.
Yeah.
Okay, rad. And then do you work with people like in person, virtually, via phone, via text? Like how is that relationship built?
Yeah, I mostly meet over video call. But if people are in Long Beach, we can meet in person too.
Okay. And then when you're like working to support people, like how do people find you actually?
Yeah, different ways. A lot of word of mouth or referrals. Some people find me online or through my writing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Who, like because, it's primarily like prescribing clinicians who listen to this podcast. So like, who do you think would be like an appropriate referral recommendation from them to your services or services like yours?
Yeah, so I would say if you're working with someone and seeing that they need some extra support. Yeah, either with, the social aspects of coming out to family or navigating their workplace, or if they're feeling overwhelmed with, because of neurodivergence, like the steps of like how to access care, things like that. I think that would be a good opportunity to refer them over to me.
Yeah. And do you like, oh, I lost my train of thought. Hold on. So we were just talking about appropriate referrals. Oh, yeah. Like, do you know other people doing work similar to yours?
Yeah, I do. I feel like the term gender doula is kind of like a newer term as far as I know, but I know some folks will use different terms, but I think it's kind of a emergent and growing field.
Rad. Are there any of your colleagues that you're particularly fond of, or find like, um, if you don't have space, like that's like where you would send someone next, kind of like building community?
Yeah. Yeah, we each have a little bit of a different focus. But someone else that I've worked with is mixed lifestyling. They do gender doula work and other types of work, and could be appropriate for someone who wants to work with a person of color. Also, Eli at the gender doula is their name, is his name, sorry. And yeah, he tends to be kind of full though, so but he has a lot of great resources as well.
Amazing. And yeah, do you only work with people one-on-one? Do you ever do like group sessions or like trainings for community groups, so like community members, or trainings for like organizations and institutions like with healthcare providers or anything like that?
Yeah. So yeah, I do a mix. And I guess I didn't mention earlier that I also work with like families and providers who want to learn about these things. Um, so the one-on-one sessions, I do work with a lot of different folks. Currently, for my group sessions, I'm working on one called Staying True for NeuroQueers, and we go through different things like boundaries, self-care strategies, finding community. So there may be more in the future, but that's what I have right now.
Oh, that sounds so. Staying True sounds like it's very much directed at community members.
Yeah.
How often do you run that group?
So I'm gonna have my first one next month, and then I'm hoping to do it maybe a couple times a year.
Yeah, that sounds great. I feel like boundaries and self-care. What was the other thing you said?
Oh, and like building community.
Building community. I feel like those are three things I talk to my patients about like all of the time. And it's not necessarily something that like I necessarily have like the time or resources or skills to like offer a ton of support around, right? And I think it's as part of this work that is so important. And like I think it's something that I can address in a way simply because I have lived experience that like some of my allied clinician colleagues probably feel maybe a little even less knowledgeable about, or like less resourced around. Um, yeah, how many sessions is that?
Yeah, so currently it's 3 sessions. This is kind of like my beta launch, and
Yes.
then I think that ideally I would love to expand it and grow it from there. But yeah, I agree. I feel like for people who are going through, I mean, for everyone right now, life is intense, so like I think we all need these skills. I know for myself, like even as someone who offers this and has years of experience, it's like I'm constantly, doing the daily things I have to do to like maintain my self-care, my boundaries, my community, and constantly working to grow that. And especially for folks who are going through a huge life change like a gender transition, like having boundaries and self-care skills are so, so, so important. And being able to access community, because a lot of times people may experience changes in their community or loss of family or community members. So yeah, that's kind of why I thought these 3 weeks together would be helpful for folks.
Yeah. Oh, I'm very excited about this one. And I feel like I hope you continue offering it, because I feel like it's definitely something I would recommend widely to patients. Because like I said, I think these are 3 things I talk about a lot. And I think specifically in the context of like healthcare clinicians, like I frequently ask or talk to my patients about like advocacy for themselves within their own healthcare, or setting boundaries with us as healthcare workers. Because the reality is that like every trans person who interacts with the healthcare system is going to have someone like ask an inappropriate question at some point that has to do with their transness and not their like healthcare needs. Right. And so really like and especially now, like it was already bad in the healthcare system, like don't get me wrong, but especially in the political climate as it exists now, with like the Christian Nationals like really targeting like people of trans experience, like it has changed the tone even within the greater community. Like that's their goal, right? That's like why they run these like media campaigns. And so I always encourage my patients, like I always say, consent is essential. If I ever ask you any questions you don't want to answer, feel free to say that. It's not going to prevent my ability to prescribe to you. If I absolutely had to know that information to write your prescription, I would let you know that so you can make a decision. You know, and like I also say, like I actually encourage you to say no to me, or say no to like getting your labs drawn or your like vitals checked or something like that while you're working with our team, because like at our team, we're going to say, thank you so much for setting a boundary, and move on. So you get to practice that skill in like a safe space where you're not like in a space where you're less sure about the reaction, and like having to use it for the first time. Right. And so I think clinicians, that's like one of the examples around how I talk about just boundary setting within the context of seeking healthcare for my patients. I don't know if that prompts any thoughts. There was no questions in there, Bowie, but I don't know if that prompts any thoughts from you.
No, yeah, actually, I was thinking about this too when I was thinking about preparing for this podcast, because yeah, consent is so, so important for providers. And in some ways, I think to me, because I have, a social work background, it feels very kind of basic, but I also have heard so many stories of folks who have gone to medical providers and haven't had consent being honored. So I definitely feel like if anyone's listening to this, and hasn't learned about that, like that's a great thing to deep dive into. And I really appreciate your share about how you do it, because for people who are in these positions of authority, creating spaces where people can say no and honor their boundaries can be really healing. And yeah, it can just be really powerful and healing, and an opportunity for someone to change, just like you said. So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah. And I think, that I love like the language, this is a safe space to say no. I feel like I might borrow that from you in working with patients, because I feel like that's like, right. Healthcare spaces do not feel like safe places to say no, because like when we are seeking healthcare, we're vulnerable, and the people we're seeing have something we need. Right. And so there's so much fear that if we say no, we won't be able to access what we need,
Yeah.
even if it violates our boundaries. Right. And so this is, yeah, this is such a huge part of both trauma-informed work and culturally humble work, right? Like cultural humility asks that we actually work to flatten that power differential that exists between a provider and a patient. And right, trauma-informed work like really wants us to have every interaction be driven by consent. And that means like, even for me, like, right, that starts before I even start asking questions. Like, right, that's like, I'm going to explain like the framework of our visit and what I'm trying to accomplish with our visit at the beginning, so you can consent to that before we even start, versus just waiting to ask for consent for my patient when I'm about to do a physical exam or prescribe a medication, which is more of the framework I was taught as a learner. And so
Yeah.
I just think that's really powerful, making this a safe space to say no.
And I feel like it also is really important for neurodivergent clients, especially people who are autistic, having an awareness of like what you're getting into, and just like communicating expectations so people know in advance. Like, I think as much as possible for folks to know in advance what to expect when they're going into a session or meeting with a provider can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's like, oh gosh, that's a really good point. We've been working on, like, one of our goals, our anti-racism trainer we work with was like, really encouraged us to make more video content so that like information was available in multiple formats and less accessible to people who need information in different formats, which is we are striving to do, I would say, as like a small business with a small team and limited budget. Definitely like we are slow in achieving that goal, but we are working towards it. And but I think like a really good addition would be like, we have people do a free 15-minute introductory session before they see a medical clinician to kind of explain how the clinic works. But I think like maybe a little video clip of like what to expect at your first medical appointments would be a really lovely addition. And maybe going over some of these things, like it's a safe place to say no, and like this is like what the flow of the visit usually looks like, and this is what usually happens, and would be really rad to have. So thanks for saying that. I'll put it on my list of videos to make.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. What, like, I'm like, now that we're on this topic, do you have any other suggestions, or like, what are the things you wish like prescribing clinicians knew
Mm.
about our community or working with us?
Yeah. Ooh, okay. What feels relevant? I feel like I could go in a bunch of different directions with that, but yeah, I guess on the topic of just like neurodivergence, because a lot of queer and trans people are also neurodivergent. So I think it's really important to be educated on that and to learn about that. So there are some basic things, like we said, like providing information in advance. Also, maybe considering the sensory needs of a space. So some people, I mean, everyone's sensory needs are going to be different. So, and I know that a lot of providers are working within their own limitations, but if it's possible to like ask people in advance, like what accommodations might you need? And also, thinking about like overhead lighting sometimes can be overwhelming for folks. Like, so if people know in advance, maybe they could wear like a hat or sunglasses, something to help with that. Like loud machines can be overstimulating. Um, so like if there's things you can't control, letting people know in advance can be helpful. If there are things you can change to make it more sensory friendly, that's great too. And then knowing like a lot of people when they come into a session, I keep saying session because I'm coming from the mental health field, but
Great. It's great.
um, yeah, we all have our little lingo.
Yes.
Yeah, but when people come in to like see a provider, like, um, just the point leading all the things that had to happen before someone even comes to a doctor and says, I want to try testosterone or hormone therapy or whatever they're requesting. There's so much that had to happen before that point. So I think just one, honoring that, like just like being like energetically just knowing like that's a big deal and honoring that feels really vague. Um, and yeah, I think any ways to just like provide that little extra bit of compassion and care can go a really long way. And some folks um, may feel more comfortable communicating through writing or may need time to like answer questions about things. So even if people can have questions in advance, like that can be helpful, or just like giving people time to answer, like allowing people to not feel necessarily rushed if possible. So those are all things I think could be helpful. I mean, and I'm also thinking in the past I was an ASL interpreter, so just remembering that like ASL interpretation is something someone might ask for. So having a system for requesting that can be helpful. If you're working at an office, a front office, and you get a call and someone says, "Hi, this call is being interpreted by ASL interpreting service," it's not spam. Someone's using an interpreter. It may sound a little spammy. Um, so that's a side thought that came up as I was talking. But yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely, one of my team members at our clinic said something to me that like, is one of those things that I feel like maybe shifted a little bit how I like think about the world and like has stuck with me. It's like lives rent free in my brain. I guess as maybe the younger people say, I don't know, I'm 41 now, but anywho, they said the difference between something being truly accessible versus like having accommodations is like you don't have to ask when it's accessible, and when like we offer accommodations, but people have to ask for them. And like that was, and they actually said it a little more gracefully than me. I'm going to need to ask them to repeat it one day. But I think clinicians, that was really meaningful to me in this space. And it like makes me think a lot about like what Bowie is saying, just because like, if our goal is to create truly inclusive and accessible spaces, like eventually we will hopefully have spaces where like people like won't necessarily have to ask for some of these things, like overhead lighting or like a decrease in additional auditory like stimulation and things like that. Like our clinics will be designed to include them, right? Like from a perspective of universal design. But until then, like helping people understand what to expect and offering what accommodations we can is like our good like in between strategy. And so I think it's like it's super great if that's something that like you can put in the sticky note on someone's chart, right? Like their sticky note pop-up or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of their like permanent medical record, but that's just like, oh, dim the lights or like use lamps when this client comes in, or right. So like they don't have to ask every time because it's like really exhausting, right? I maybe not for everyone, definitely is for me. And so right. And like right, we kind of all have a limited amount of energy that we have for existing in this world and doing the things that we want or need to do. And the thing about trans and neurodiverse people is like we spend so much of that energy just trying to like right, deal with like the stress of being a marginalized community, right? And so then we have less energy for the actual doctor's appointment, right? We have less energy for the actual like counseling appointment or session with our NP. And we're able to get less out of it. We're able to remember less from it. Like we're able to accomplish less in that time frame because we're distracted by the evil overhead lights, or right, we were misgendered 7 times just getting to that appointment. In the span of the past couple of hours. And so I think what Bowie was saying about honoring how much has happened before a patient or client gets into your little tiny sphere of the system, right? I'm sure you maybe, when I first heard you say that, like I was thinking about like, you know, all the forms they had to fill out and like making sure they like finding you, like finding an affirming provider, like doing all the research to find that provider, and then all the forms they had to fill out to access that appointment, and then scheduling that appointment, and then like giving everyone their insurance information and making sure their insurance is going to like pay for it if they're, you know, lucky enough to have insurance, and understanding what their copay is going to be, right? Like all of these things. That's really what I was thinking about when you first said that. But I think like the bigger framework for that is actually like all of that other minority stress that happens in the context of coming to that appointment, right, or coming to that session. And I think that's just like that accessibility versus accommodations, and like that inclusivity component that is a framework that I feel like for me continues to expand and grow. Again, I didn't ask questions. I'm the baddest podcast interviewer today because I'm not asking questions. I'm just like, I'll make a statement, and then can you tell, like, this is my neurodiversity. I'm not the best with follow-up questions.
We're just flowing with it.
I'm like, I make a statement and then you make a statement, and then we just switch. This is how we have a conversation.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I know, I'm just thinking of stories of like people I know who've gone to ask for some type of gender affirming care, and it's like it took so much to even get there and then ask, and then to be told no can feel like really devastating, or even not right now. So I know sometimes, you know, there are medical reasons why that happens, but yeah, I think just having compassion and resources for that, like if that is something that needs to happen. And I'm also thinking about just like, I know you, when you told me about this podcast, you were talking about haze, and yeah, I've been thinking a lot about yeah, just how common eating disorders are in our communities, and um it just feels pretty dangerous to me, I think, to tell someone that they need to lose weight to access care. And I'm not a doctor, so I can't say like that whether or not that's medically necessary, but um I just think it's important for people to know that like that can have some really intense and dangerous effects on clients. So yeah, just doing the research to figure out like, is it actually medically necessary for someone to lose weight to access this care? And are there other accommodations that could happen so they could still access care without having to lose weight? Because a lot of times that can lead to people to disordered eating, so people can access care that they feel is life affirming. So yeah, that's been on my mind a lot recently.
Yeah, I way to like lead into my pre-visit questionnaire. So thank you so much for keeping us on topic. I we just did a training with Radical Health Alliance, and Annie is the like lead over there, and they do, you know, I think her tagline is championing. Oh, that's a hard one for me. I do have a little bit of a phonetics processing thing, but championing health for fat people. And they do like a lot of like size inclusive, like weight bias training, and for all kinds of organizations, definitely for healthcare organizations. And so like we were just like very specifically doing a like training on this last month. And I think one, for me, I am a medical provider, and I will say that there is no absolute contraindication to gender affirming care. And they're like, right, we're primarily talking to prescribers, but for any community members, contraindication means like a reason to not do something, right? And absolute contraindications in healthcare are like, they're like non-negotiable, right? Like this is the until I have a kink background. I'm like, this is the hard limit. Right, it means a thing that like we, no matter what other healthcare items we're talking about, this is too risky. And you know, I think the concept of absolute contraindications is important in healthcare, but to like, I definitely don't think they exist in gender affirming care. I don't know that I think they should exist in the framework of healthcare, period. Because if really what we want is a shared decision-making model that individualizes healthcare based off of the person in front of us, like values and goals, and bodily autonomy, like, then they get to decide. Like, even if the thing, right, like, for example, like someone has like an estrogen-fed breast cancer and they want to continue estrogen therapy because that's like more important to them than like the length of the life that they're going to have left on this planet, right? Like that is their choice. And I think, right, like, I think, again, that's why having like enough time for visits that don't feel rushed for people so they can have a really thorough, informed consent process. So they really do feel like they have all the information they need to make the decision that's best for their body, right? Because there are times like, right, I had a patient recently who like wanted to induce lactation and also was having some heart palpitations, and the primary medication we use for lactation induction can cause some heart stuff. And I was like, I really don't think we should, I was like, I can't even really counsel you around the risk until like we know more about what's going on with your heart. Like, I really think you should have a heart workup before we start any of this, you know, and, but my policy is I start from a place of yes. So like whatever my patient's asking, I just say like, ultimately, if that's like what you decide is best for you after we talk, like that is what we will do. I'd like to give you some more information right after I better understand your goals so you can like make the best decision for you. Right. And that like really changes the tone of the conversation for people, because like when we're so focused on like, I've already heard a no from someone in the past, like I'm so fixated on just getting the thing I feel like I need. I'm like, my brain is chaos day, sorry. But just like, I think, you know, coming back to what Bowie was saying, like, I think starting from a place of yes, especially in gender affirming care, is really, really important. Like, we as a medical community have harmed trans and gender diverse people, and then anyone with any intersectional identity has been like, that has been amplified. Fat people, Black people, brown people, like the medical community has systematically, repetitively, you know, traumatized people from these communities for our own like knowledge and interest. And so like that exists in the room when we are in the room with that patient, and to not acknowledge that and to continue to exist in this place where like I'm not starting from a place of yes, like I'm starting from a paternalistic, I have the power and I'll decide what you need, is like antithetical to like my like personal values, but also what I want to see in healthcare. And I also think it's antithetical to shared decision making. Like if this is a concept that we truly embrace as a field and as a specialty, like then, you know, like that really means like letting the individual like really lead the experience in decision making. You know, and I think so often people like use the like do no harm like part of our oath to like kind of justify saying no to prescribing something that might cause someone harm. And like ultimately we can't actually decide what is more harmful for them, if it's that medication or if it's the lack of that access. You know, and the very next line says to do no harm, which includes not depriving people of the goods of life. Like, so that oath continues on, and it continues on to have like space for this possibility that like someone's going to define the goods of life differently than we do. And I just think I've like gotten very lost in talking for a very long time, but I think yes, like we should start from a place of yes, and that like this should be about letting people decide what's best for them and their framework, not what's best for me and my framework. And that's like a pretty radical stance as a healthcare provider, and it can feel scary as the person signing the prescription, but like I just think that's like where this space should be going, especially with that history of like abuse and trauma. Like we just like we fucked up real bad as a profession, you know?
Yeah, it feels very radical, and it also feels like, I mean, I truly believe that, you know, as the world is changing, hopefully, I mean, there's, I think, a lot of resistance to change, but we each have our role. Like, no matter what job we're in, like, we can be a part of that change and that larger systemic change. And um, yeah, like I myself, and I know so many people who have experienced barriers to accessing healthcare um, related to gender transition, and it does harm, like, it does impact us, and even just knowing that we're in control, like you said, like, it feels different to know, like, "Oh, I can't take this medication because my doctor won't let me," versus, "I'm choosing not to take this medication because of the risks until I get more information." Like, that is a total shift in power and feels very different, I think, as someone who's receiving care. And that's why, like, when I am working with people, I really do strive to support them in what they need and like support them in coming back to what they want and what they need, because I do feel like often there's so many people trying to tell you what to do. And it's just such a complicated time right now with, I mean, I came out as trans like 10 years ago. And since then, so much has changed, like for better and worse. Like, and on one hand, there's so much more awareness. There's like people who get they them pronouns in a way that wasn't happening back then. And like, and yet there's also such a big pushback, and there's so many people who are trying to erase us and eradicate us. And so I think coming out as trans in this climate can feel really confusing, because it can feel like you really have to justify who you are. You have like you're coming in from a place of feeling like you have to justify who you are to the world. And then it feels like if you are wanting to transition, you have to fit this box. You have to do all the things you always had to know. You had to always be like this. Like, I remember like my family being like, but you liked playing with dolls or you liked doing this. And it's like, okay, but I also did these other things, but also why am I having to go like point by point through my whole life to justify this? Like, anyone can play with dolls, anyone can wear makeup, anyone like we can be complex. Like, I can want to change my name but not want to go on hormones, or I can want to go on hormones and still want to dress exactly the same. Like, it's not like there's just so much pressure to feel like you have to take it all or none of it, and it in that way it feels very binary. Like, we're trying to break out of this binary system where we're being forced into these boxes, and I think it can be replicated in trans communities as well. So yeah, I think having choice, having agency, and then having providers who, yeah, because I also felt like when I was first wanting to go on hormones, it felt like I wanted to go to my providers and talk it through with them, like talk through the pros and cons. But it felt like if I had any doubt or wasn't sure, then I wouldn't be given access to that. So I hit a point where someone kind of told me, they're like, you have to decide whether or not you want to do this and be sure, and then go in and tell them, like, this is what I want.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's a little bit of what I offer folks. It's like figuring that out, like, navigating the questions, but it can also be helpful to talk to your doctor who knows like more in depths of like physically, like what are the risks? What are,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I'm grateful for everything you said and how you framed that. It feels really important.
Yeah. I think it's like, again, like it's such a big shift in how healthcare has been framed and approached, particularly Western healthcare. I should, be very US. This is a very US centric conversation, right? But um, right, I think that shift feels really affirming, right? Because our history is so full of like misogyny and white supremacy and harm caused to marginalized communities. Like, I don't want to continue doing the things that I was trained to do, that have this like generational history of harm. And I think uh, um, Bowie brought up some other points that like I just totally, because my brain is a little stupid today, but around like right, like being denied care because of size and being denied care for other medical reasons. Like, again, particularly for hormonal interventions, like I don't think there's any reason someone should ever be denied care outside of lack of capacity. So if they don't have the capacity to make an informed decision, right. And then and so then working with the people who do have their medical decision making capacity and like working as a team to support them is, I think, really, really important. Again, I think that's a whole nother nuanced conversation, because like we do have a history of assuming lack of capacity for people who probably have it in this country, like specifically around things like forced sterilization and race. But just like, I think outside of that capacity, there's no medical contraindications. And then I think where we see size restrictions come up so often is accessing surgery, right? And Bowie's point is, spot on. Like, trans people have eating disorders at 4 times the rates of our cis peers, right? And definitely, then like telling someone, even without the history of an eating disorder, that they can't access care because of size is like particularly high risk of harm and triggering like unhealthy, unsafe habits to access that care. And so I, do think that's really, really important. And so I often talk like on this podcast and other trainings I do that I think it's really, really essential for referring clinicians to have vetted anyone they're going to refer patients to, so that we don't send them to people who are going to turn them away because, like, right, someone who, just like you were talking about, all those steps that go into getting to that appointment, someone, right, is going through all these steps to get in front of the surgeon to access some surgery, and that's been a long journey already. And then they get to that surgeon's office and they think it's actually finally happening and they're so excited, and then that surgeon says no because your body's too big, right? Like, how harmful is that on so many levels? And so really knowing before you refer someone if it's going to be a successful referral for that person or not, a safe referral for that person or not, right? And if you don't know that information and don't have time or capacity to figure it out, letting the patient know that in advance so they can try to do it to find that out before they're sitting in that appointment. So hopeful and optimistic themselves, right, I think is really an essential part of what we do as like referring providers. Absolutely. And same thing around other like size, around race, like, right, like sending someone to a surgeon who is not experienced working on darker skin and like going to have more difficulty with scarring, or who is going to potentially put like white features on a black face, and that's not the patient's goals, right? Like, that's not what they want for their own body. And so really thinking about these things in the context of like how we can support our patients in a safer referral process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And having them work with someone like Bowie who might help them walk through all of these steps, right, around like meeting their surgeon or picking out a surgeon or like figuring out all of those things that you support your clients kind of in this process. Or just knowing they have someone to talk to, like if it does go poorly, I think is so helpful. Someone who has probably had some negative experiences themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely like so many layers to this. But yeah, like I feel like for folks who do have negative experiences, like that's when it's really important to have a support plan for folks. And I mean, avoiding the experiences in the first place is like the best, like can we avoid negative experiences? Sometimes like they happen, and it's like, how can we support folks like and make sure that they have either, a support network, a trans call that they can be on, like people they can talk to, like for autistic folks, like what are their special interests that like can bring them comfort or sensory comfort. Like all of these things are the things that I think about, I guess, from my background when people are navigating this, like what can help people to move through these systems, because even if everything goes well, it's still hard. So like what is needed navigating all of that. And another thing that's coming to mind too is just being clear with folks in advance, like especially for surgeries, about how much aftercare they'll need, and like how to ask for support from folks. And if you know of any resources, that's great too. But I think that that's like a common struggle, is like asking for help after surgery, and knowing what to ask for, and navigating that too.
Absolutely. I think it like gets back to like the course you're teaching on boundary, self-care, and community. Like, right. Those are like all things like that will help us navigate negative experiences when they do happen. Right. Like, I had a negative experience with a clinician who, ultimately was like fairly dismissive of me and like told me everything that was wrong with me and my whole treatment plan, like without ever asking me any questions or doing an exam, and then at the end of it, she was like, okay, I'm just going to do a brief exam now. And I'm a physician. So I knew she was doing it just for billing purposes, like not because she was actually paying attention to my body or cared, because she had literally already told me what was wrong with me and what the plan was. Right. So like, this is just like cross the T's, dot the I's, so I can send my bill and get paid. And I was like, no, you're not going to touch my body, and she was like washing her hands and she's like, oh, it's no big deal. It'll just be quick. And I was like, do not fucking touch my body, and like knowing that boundary, I knew that boundary. Right. And so like, it felt really, like, even though it's scary to set a boundary and scary to advocate for myself, like I knew the action I was taking was like lined up with my values and my goals for myself. And so it made it that like much more accessible to me, because like I had some experience like learning about these things and thinking about them and like planning for them, right, in ways that like we don't necessarily all do before we go into a healthcare experience. But like, right, like I have like I've experienced sexual assault, and I've experienced like sexual assault and harassment by colleagues. And so like I am like, the clinicians that I let touch my body now are few and far between. And so like I know I am very grounded in like what my values are around this. If I do not feel safe with you, you do not touch my body. And you don't actually just get like I think you're going to be a safe person just because you're a healthcare worker path in my book, right? Like you have to prove that you're a safe person to me, and this person did not do that. And so, and I set the boundary first, like without a curse word, and she tried to dismiss it and walk over it. And, you know, so like, and just knowing, looking back on that experience and like it was a bad experience. It was a bad healthcare experience. I reported her to her institution. I didn't end up getting any of what I needed out of that healthcare experience. I got misgendered the whole time I was there. Like, you know, like everything about that experience was bad. But I didn't feel bad. I didn't have nearly as much trauma if like I had participated in that exam. And I didn't have like, right. When I think about it, I actually have like pretty like, good feelings about like setting that boundary and maintaining it. Right. And feeling like what a different experience that, you know, was for me at that point in my life compared to like how I would have done that when I had less experience and had thought about those things less. And I've like a little bit lost the thread there, but like, I just think like, you know, Bowie's class around boundaries, self-care, and community are like, those are things that are so important, right? And like in navigating these experiences, whether they're positive or negative, and setting people, Bowie's talking about setting people up with the support that they need for navigating these experiences when they're positive or negative. And I think that's people like Bowie, that's people doing this gender doula work, right? That's and how everyone builds their support system is going to look a little differently, but like I absolutely love community and peer support groups. And not a lot of people don't love groups. They're like, I don't want to go to a group. And like, right. That's fine. That's why there's options like Bowie. So they can have one-on-one support, and like maybe it's a mental health provider, a trans or non-binary mental health provider, or like an affirming one. Although I really think, again, people with lived experience can support in a slightly different way that can be really beneficial. Right. And it might be building out, this greater community that's really essential and like really important after things like surgery, because you do need like meals and dog walking and cat litter box scooping and all of those things, right? And so we definitely have a lot of resources on the QueerDoc website for patients about like what to expect with a surgery, like, and checklists for like how to prepare for surgery and stuff like that. And then there's definitely a few organizations now that are doing post-operative care support. And so a couple of them are geographically bound, I think, like in California and New York, that are like completely volunteer run. So I think they're at no cost to the person recovering. And then there's another organization doing it that it is paid on a sliding scale, and they will travel. They do it locally, but then they will also travel to you as well. You know, and so those are resources available on the QueerDoc website and all of the surgery information. I've gone over time, and, and I want to respect your time, Bowie. I really appreciate having you as a guest. Do you have any final words to our listeners?
Yeah, I'm just taking in like everything we said. And I mean, I feel like the theme that is coming up is just, like consent and allowing people space to express themselves and make choices for themselves, and directing people back to their own awareness. And I do feel like each of us, sometimes it can feel overwhelming because the systems can feel really hard. And I think there can also be shame when we do make mistakes. So I want to hold space for anyone who's listening and thinking like, oh no, I did that. Like I think a balance of knowing like you were trained a certain way, you were set up to work a certain way, and like you can change.
Mm-hmm.
And just having compassion for that. And I lost my third thought. Yeah, I guess, and I guess I also just want to say that like with each point of contact, like whether someone's coming to me or coming to a provider, Every time someone's coming into contact and talking about their gender, their feelings about their body, their transition, like that is an opportunity for someone to feel seen and witnessed and cared for. So just thinking about touch, even like there's a whole school of somatic therapy where it's like people just holding and touching someone's body and like asking them like gently what they're feeling. There's a lot of other aspects to it, but that can be really powerful for folks too. So like even if you're touching clients in a session, like consent and care and feeling compassion for the person you're working with, I feel like can be really powerful, and make maybe a challenging experience less challenging and also can be healing. So yeah, and if folks want to learn more about my work, my website, it's going through a change. Currently, it's rainbowchrysaliscoaching.com. I'm in the process of trying to change it to rainbowwinnike.com. um, but yeah, you can follow me. I have my newsletter where I share a lot of just different thoughts, things I'm learning, resources. And yeah, you can feel free to email me, reach out. And like I said, I'm available for consultations too.
Amazing. And when is there a place people can like refer patients or clients to the group sessions that you're going to be doing? Is that on your website as well?
Yeah, that's also on my website.
Super excited. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a fabulous day.